Good morning, everybody. And let me add my own welcome and enthusiasm for being with you all today. And a special thank you to Alberto for giving me the honor of being the moderator of this initial session on this very great anniversary. This anniversary is an opportunity to reflect on the school's history, its growth, and its current status as an institution dedicated to the education of social workers. For 10 years, as co-chair of the school's advisory board and an alumnus, and more recently as an adjunct faculty member, I've been in a unique position to see and experience firsthand the school's transformation. I believe, borrowing a term made famous by Jim Collins in his popular book, that this graduate school is well into a transition from being good to being great. High standards and goals have been set. There is a recommitment to the mission and values of Boston College and the graduate school. Faculty and staff and students are held to high standards of accountability. Organizational and strategic thinking, planning, and management are strategic and transformational. There is a keen sensitivity to domestic and global issues and opportunities. And priority is on high impact, high performance, and innovation. This school has all the elements of a social enterprise. A focus on innovation, social justice, results, scale, and ongoing fiscal health. The Social Innovation and Leadership Initiative is a perfect microcosm of what is happening throughout the school, which brings us to the topic of today's session, the power of social innovation. Stephanie Berzin will talk to us in a few minutes about social innovation. I had the opportunity at our April board meeting to hear Stephanie's review of this initiative. Soon afterwards, I was impressed with a remark made by the new dean of the Harvard Business School, Nitin Noria, in an interview he gave in the New York Times. He talked about his goals for the business school, including this statement: "We need our students to be better at integrating everything they are learning, particularly to develop an entrepreneurial imagination." I love that term. This is exactly what the School of Social Work is doing, developing the entrepreneurial imagination, in this instance, in a graduate school in the social sector. Then I found in reading the school's recent anniversary publication that two of our distinguished stakeholders also highlighted the importance of imagination. The Superior General of the Jesuits, Father Nicholas, talks about, quote, "the depth of thought and imagination that are distinguishing marks of the Ignatian tradition." Jack Connors says simply, "The real market is for imagination." There's inspiration everywhere. So today, with the help of Stephanie and our distinguished panel, we have a very special opportunity to develop our entrepreneurial imaginations. So with that, I would welcome Stephanie Berzin to the podium. Stephanie is the co-director of the Social Innovation and Leadership Initiative here at the school. And her complete background, or at least part of it, is in the program. So Stephanie, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about social innovation. It is both timely and relevant as we consider the school's past and look forward to the future. You may be wondering and thinking, what is social innovation? Bill Gates has been quoted as saying, "Never before in history has innovation offered the promise of so much to so many in so short a time. Imagine if we harness that potential, that energy for social good." That is social innovation. Social innovation is using the power of innovation and creative problem solving to respond to social needs. It is developing and implementing sustainable solutions to social problems. We can consider social innovation as the power for transformation, and this power can take multiple forms. At the top of the triangle, we can think about thoughts, ideas, or shifts in paradigm. If we rethink or change our way of thinking, different solutions will emerge. And the second part of the triangle is changes in structure or process. If we do business differently in the social sector, we will come up with different solutions. And lastly, we can think about action, including new programs and services. Traditionally, for many, this is what they think of as social innovation, developing new programs or structures. But this is only part of the puzzle or part of a paradigm in which we can make real transformation. I want to share a few examples of what I mean by social innovation. And while the examples are many, I want to highlight one that speaks to each part of the triangle. Thinking first about changing thoughts or changing paradigms, an example that comes to my mind is individual development accounts, or IDAs. This is about shifting the way we think about poverty. Poverty is often addressed as a problem that we think of about what somebody makes or what somebody spends. But individual development accounts shift our thinking so that poverty is not about what you make, but about what you save. A second example, thinking about changes in structure or process, comes out of the work of the professor here, Kevin Mahoney, and the National Resource Center for Participant-Directed Services, which you'll hear more about later. Through this change in structure or process, there was a shift in the way services are delivered for people with disabilities, from a service system or a structure that is dominated by the government to one that is dominated or driven or directed by the consumer. The transformation is remarkable when we shift process or structure. Last, to touch on an example of action or program, many people know about the wonderful work of the Harlem Children's Zone. In this example, new programs and new services shifted the educational outcomes of youth in a low-income community. Through each of these possibilities for shift or transformation, we see social innovation. I want to touch briefly on social entrepreneurship as a part of this paradigm. Many people hear in the news, and there's a lot of attention being given to social entrepreneurship as a more limited view of social innovation. Social entrepreneurship represents a subset of a shifted paradigm. It focuses on developing new programs to respond to social need. It is often led by an individual or a social entrepreneur using principles of entrepreneurship that often takes place outside of traditional systems. It has had tremendous support in the business community, and there are many organizations that support social entrepreneurship. Ashoka, the Skoll Foundation, the Schwab Foundation, Echoing Green, the White House Office on Social Innovation and Civic Participation, all support the work of social entrepreneurs. It is critical that social entrepreneurship continues and that it remains an important part of a shifted paradigm. But we also need a larger frame to social innovation, one that includes social entrepreneurship, but one that celebrates and stimulates social innovation within the larger social sector. It is important to frame social innovation not just as the development of new programs outside of traditional structures, but also shifting thoughts, processes, and services within the social service agency community. It's imperative that the leadership in social work and the leadership of social service agencies is prepared and has the competencies to develop, implement, and sustain social innovation. It is this leadership and these agencies that provide the bulk of the services to people in need and the bulk of responses to social problems. Traditional structures must have and gain the capacity to develop, sustain, and scale social innovation. Social innovation is an imperative for today. We view social innovation as critical because there are long-standing, complex social problems that we have yet to articulate adequate solutions. We have partial solutions. We have tried to come up with solutions to many problems, but problems remain and continue to become more complex. There are new social problems and emergent social issues that we have not yet grappled with. Social innovation is required to solve these problems. And we need social innovation because the economic, political, cultural, and societal context has shifted. We can no longer rely on traditional sources of financial support. We require broad sector collaboration. We require broad cross-sector investment in order to solve social problems. And we have reached a time in history where innovation is possible due to advances in knowledge building and development and due to technology. As we consider social innovation as an emergent paradigm, social work has a critical role to play in its emerging leadership and to make significant contributions to this field. Social work as a field brings competencies, critical perspectives, and a value system to the social innovation dialogue. As a profession, we have the experience and training in working in complex social problems. We have worked with and alongside marginalized communities and populations. We have a value of social justice, experience with collaborative partnerships. We have a history of organizational and community change and of social change. It is imperative that we are not just part of the dialogue, but that we take a leadership role as the social innovation trend continues. So how can we think about social work's new and committed role? How can we build a community of social innovators in the social work profession? And how do we make social innovation relevant to our education, our research, our policy, and our practice? We need to develop adequate training models. We need to prepare tomorrow's social innovators in our MSW programs. Those who will be social entrepreneurs developing new programs, but those who will be social innovators working in traditional programs and making change. We need to stimulate the capacity for innovation among social sector leadership. Social work leadership needs to develop the competencies required for ideation, implementation, and assessment of social innovations. Social service agencies need to develop organizational capacity to sustain and implement social innovation. And the field of social work needs to be at the front line of research and data gathering around social innovation and the mechanism that supports it. We need to be at the table and part of this discussion alongside with the business and public policy communities. These steps are critical as we consider our place in the future and our ability to continue to contribute to solving future societal challenges. So as we consider the potential for social work, I want to end by just briefly touching on some of the work of the social innovation and leadership initiatives at the GSSW. Through our program and collaborative, we strive to foster social innovation within the social service sector. Our program includes the MSW macro focus on social innovation and leadership, a new platform for training MSW students to develop competencies related to social innovation processes, projects, and perspectives. Intensive experiential learning opportunities and recognizing student leaders support this aim. Our collaborative includes our Social Innovation Lab, a 12-month partnership working with and collaborating with social service agencies to help them develop and implement social innovation. To support the development of a practice community of social innovators, we will sponsor events such as an inaugural conference that engages social innovators who work in social service agencies. Lastly, we conduct research to build the evidence for social innovation practice for the future. If you're interested in finding out more about what we're doing, I encourage you to visit us on the web. I appreciate an opportunity to at least outline a bit about social innovation and the critical power it has for transformation for the future of social work. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Hello again. Now we come to the discussion part of the morning and our distinguished panel. So I'd like to proceed to invite them to join me at this table. First, Larry Davis. Larry is the Dean of the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Pittsburgh and Director of the Center on Race and Social Problems. He is also a colleague of mine on the school's advisory board. Again, a more complete description of each of these individuals is in your program. Second, I would like to introduce Marcy Pitts-Kasufes, co-director of the Social Innovation and Leadership Initiative with Stephanie, and director of the Sloan Center on Aging and Work. Welcome, Marcy. Third, I would like to introduce Josefina Vasquez, who's the executive director of the Boston Women's Fund. Welcome, Josefina. And finally, last but not least, Kevin Mahoney, who's the director of our National Resource Center for Participant-Directed Services at the School of Social Work. Welcome, Kevin. Hi. The way we're going to process this discussion is as follows. We will have a panel discussion to probably 5 or 10 minutes before noon. I'm going to ask everyone to answer the first question and a final question. But in between, I want to encourage as much as possible a dialogue among all of us. And I will seed the dialogue from time to time with some key questions. At about 12:05, I'm going to open up the discussion to the audience for comments or questions, and we have 2 mics for that purpose in the middle of the auditorium. So I think that will flow pretty well, and we're about at 11:30 now, so let's get going with my first question to everybody. My question is, what role does social innovation play in each of your areas of responsibility and expertise? Larry, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for having me here. I think this is a wonderful occasion, and congratulations to Boston College for its 75th anniversary. This is absolutely a wonderful event. Alberto told me, he says, well, come. Says this will only be a small, informal event. Thanks, Alberto. Actually, I'm excited about this question. I think that social work should be involved in innovative projects, and this has caused me, this forum itself has caused me to think about this. How can we be involved in what we might do? I'm not sure how best to sort of address this. I am interested in all sorts of race and social problems, just one of which is the educational problem facing our country. So I was very pleased to see the Harlem Children's Zone placed on the screen as being one of the more innovative projects to come forth in our country in quite a while. So I have some ideas about that. I think this is something that we might do. And maybe I can just say what I'm going to say finally anyway, and I'll say it up front, is I think social workers really need to be involved in the whole educational issue in America.
Good, Larry. Marcy.
Well, good morning as well. Thank you all for coming out this morning. I'm going to give you a little example of what piqued my interest in social innovation. As Bill mentioned, I direct the Sloan Center on Aging and Work. And dealing with aging and work is kind of a different space. A lot of people have been thinking about aging related to retirement issues, related to care issues. And about 6 years ago, when we started thinking about the employment expectations and opportunities for older adults, we realized that we were juxtaposing some paradoxes. And indeed, the need for innovation became very apparent. So we were mixing a little bit of some old social problems with some new expectations. The old social problems is that There continue to be age biases out there, misperceptions in some cases, and limitations on opportunities available to today's older adults. It certainly became quite clear with today's economic conditions that the need for many older adults to either extend labor force participation or find opportunities for work were in front of us. So we had an old issue and a new situation, and it certainly called forth for some innovative responses. I guess I'll summarize what I would say the need not only for innovation but social work perspectives on this became clear to me when I had a conversation with a reporter early on when the center was started, and I'd explained a little bit what we were trying to do with regard to both aging and work, and his response to me was, "Aging and work, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Those are two things I've been trying to avoid my whole life." So I thought, well, there's a space that we need a little innovation for. And so I gathered together all my social work skills and went to work. And we can talk a little bit later about how we've been trying to tackle that.
Good, Marcy. Thank you. Josefina.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here. I would say that the way the Boston Women's Fund actually connects with the whole concept of social innovation is that from its very founding, the women who actually came together to decide of putting together a fund that focused on women's issues. The whole idea wasn't to focus on women's issues, but was to focus on the issues that were impacting on the whole community and how women could come together as leaders to deal with these issues. And so that in itself was an innovative concept. And actually, the Boston Women's Fund here in our own area was the first to initiate this and has been known as a leader in this concept. And what we've done as a result is look at what we identify as social problems, and we say what we're going to be dealing with, first of all, is how to hit head-on the issues of racism, poverty, and the social issues that impact on us, whether we're looking at the LGBTQ community, or we're looking at people with disabilities, women with disabilities, etc. And I think that as a result, we're not the practitioners, but we are the organization that assures that the practitioners in this area get the funding to do the work that is necessary.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My probably looking back, my whole work life has been in the area of home and community services and supports for people with disabilities. From the point of view of people with disabilities, what we started to hear was when I need help bathing, dressing, getting out of bed, our system in the United States is one where you typically go through agencies, so I don't have much say on who helps me with such personal activities. I'm at, I don't know what to say, the mercy of the schedule of the agency, and agencies have many restrictions. The point of view from the disability community was very simple. If I had more control over my services, I think my life would be a lot better. And I could do it for the same amount of money. And that's really led into 15 years of first major research projects and then implementation research projects along the way. The core of the idea, not to go deeply, is what if people with disabilities had charge of a budget roughly equal to what an agency would have spent on their behalf, and they had appropriate supports to do that. Amazingly enough, as you start to think of it, it also starts to address problems from other sides. The worker shortage to come, the increasing diversity of the American population. One size is never going to fit all. And then I think my theory is innovation spins to innovation. all of a sudden you're looking at workforce issues, and I have to switch from a medical professional knows best to an empowerment model. Or what I've had the joy of recently is the Veterans Administration looking at not just the number of veterans of World War II years who are now in their 80s, 90s, but people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. How do you, especially in rural areas, meet that need? So I suppose one thought I have is that innovation almost leads to innovation.
Good, Kevin. Thank you. Now, let's open up and have a little bit more of a conversation. And to do that, I'd like to cite something that struck me this morning. I picked up my New York Times in my driveway this morning, and the lead headline was this: "Poverty reaches a 52-year peak, government says. Median income falls. Truly a lost decade. Findings are worse than expected." That made clear to me that we still have, as a profession and as a society and as a country, enormous, enormous challenges. So my question to the panel is, does what we're talking about today offer us some hope that we can, at least in our own small way, begin to turn things around? So I would ask anyone to respond. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, absolutely. I too was struck this morning by the 15.1% of poverty in America. I mentioned, you might have thought it strange that I mentioned education, given that we're a school of social work. But you are aware that most of the minority youth in the country, only about half of them graduate, and even larger percent of them have test scores that are at reading or arithmetic or writing levels. So this contributes in part to the problem we're facing in America. By the year 2047, half the population will be non-white. By the year 2023, better than half of all the children in America will be children that are non-white. So with so many of our children doing so poorly in this category, it's imperative that we begin to do something about this. Otherwise, we will continue to see these poverty and other social problems increase dramatically, which is why I was sort of saying it's thinking about in terms of social work. And I guess there was a little sort of a passage I wanted to think about for us, and that was I wanted to see an innovative program in which social work really helped to address the social problems that educators have faced. I think that we've been unfair a little bit to educators, that we sort of dumped all the problems on children's failure to thrive in schools on them, when in fact what we're witnessing are social problems manifesting themselves in classrooms and schools throughout the country. So I think it's surprising that social work has not been more involved in this, addressing these social problems that children experience. And that's kind of, I think certainly would be one way, certainly it's no silver bullet, but certainly be one way to reduce what we see as a bifurcating of America, becoming that of rich and poor.
Just to follow up on that, I agree very much with what you're saying. I also believe that it's really important that those that are impacted by the social problems, that they be the ones in the leadership of starting to change these problems. Part of, I think, the problem within the society is to function on a from the top to the bottom mode. And I think it's necessary to really have also another paradigm shift to an understanding that those who are suffering the oppression really need to be much more involved in saying, this is the way I want to deal with this problem, and I want to be in the leadership of change for this. It's for example, the situation within our schools. It is so important for parents to become the activists in saying, this is the situation that must change within our schools. And I think that we have seen examples of schools where parents are much more involved, and the advances that are made by our students are incredible. And this is also among students of color. And it's true that across the country, it is students of color, particularly black students and Latino students, who are actually at the bottom of the barrel. And when we're looking at exactly what can we do about this, I think we have to look at what are the successes that have occurred and also be a little more humble in listening to those who are saying, this is impacting on us, and this is the way we're recommending that the shifts be made.
Thank you. Kevin? Yep.
Oh, I don't know, just one of the things I keep on my desk is the Serenity Prayer. Or, you know, some of you know the Alcoholics Prayer, but it's, Lord, give me the wisdom to understand the things I can change, you know, I don't know what to say, the patience to deal with those I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's part of, I think, what we deal with in the spirit. I'm reminded of something Jim Lubin often says, you know, so when it comes to attacking problem, who better than us? And the responsibility to think ahead. I'll just put it this way. Within like the profit-making sector, there's almost a natural way to encourage and build and reinforce rewards. It's not always so easy in the social sector, and that's why I love the purpose of today's session, the types of things we're doing in the Innovations Lab, but trying to build that infrastructure that's going to support this development.
Good, thank you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to go after Kevin, but I think I'm going to think a little bit. We have to have a panel sometime on what do you have on your desk, you know? You've got an inspiration. Mine says something to the effect of, I'm so far behind, I think I'm first, you know? So it's like, you've lost perspective, I don't know, something like that. But that wasn't what I was going to say. Truly, I think that when you opened up today, Bill, a little bit in terms of why social innovation on what is clearly an intractable social challenge like poverty. You know, the question, I guess, comes to mind twofold. Is one of which is how can we take the risk of not doing something new? Because if we are in a situation where if we look back 50 years, despite all the wonderful work and tremendous efforts, that we need to do something different and something more. I think that one of the new elements that at least some of the ideas that social innovation brings to the table, that complementing some of the existing programs and services, the question becomes is, you know, Stephanie very articulately framed in the beginning of her orientation of how do we think differently about poverty, and if one of the issues is having access to the economy, which is really supporting us, I think that whether it's an entrepreneurial spirit or programs that essentially give people immediate access in addition to training and all the rest of it, some of the power of new programs where people are starting ventures basically, that they have opportunities in small groups and community settings of creating, whether it's businesses that have a social purpose, again, not for profit, but that not only provide training, but provide income, and that, you know, changes the dialogue in that kind of situation, that hopefully we begin to think of poverty, not only that we're going to continue, stay on course to address some of the significant issues that we know are root causes, but also provide new avenues for essentially some way forward for some other folks.
Thank you, Mike. I want to build a little bit on Josefina's comments about engaging the populations. You know, we pride ourselves on building on assets and empowering individuals and empowering communities. But at times, the more I see just social innovation and entrepreneurship played out beyond the college, and I am involved in an effort at Brown in this regard, it ignores that fundamental principle. And purpose. And I think that's what social work and social workers can bring to the table. But I'd be interested in just getting a little more comment on that, because I think it's very important.
Right. Well, let me just add a little bit more. And that is, for example, even the concept empowerment. A lot of organizations will say, we exist to empower the community. Well, then the community will never be empowered. Because if the community is not empowering itself and has to depend on an outside entity to empower it, then that's dependency. And the community must empower itself, must be independent. It's the whole concept of codependency. And so we must be independent. We must have self-determination and therefore decide what are the steps to empower ourselves. And I just want to put that out.
Good.
I'll take a teeny bit of a stab at it. With Stephanie, it's been a pleasure that we have been pilot testing a couple different models and approaches to not only creating some opportunities and guided experiences so that social innovation is possible, working directly with social service agencies and building the capacity so innovation can come from within. But I think, in addition to that, how we bring to it not only the values but the knowledge and competencies of social workers, and certainly the concept of building on assets and teams, an empowerment perspective has been so critical. I think that it's one of the things that, as Stephanie was saying, social workers not only have a place at the table for social innovation, there is a compelling reason for social work leadership here. And certainly in the design of some of these models of our social innovation lab, a piece of this is to transform some of the notions about leadership and the capacities for leadership within organizations, so it's not solely dependent on 1, 2, or maybe 3 leaders, but how the experience itself can change the dynamics. I'll give you one quick example that some of the organizations we've had a pleasure of working with, we first need to engage somebody who's going to kind of sponsor the project and sanction it and say, yes, we'll participate. And we've kind of tried to use some language around, okay, those are our champions for their project. And they engage other people, and we've used language that's your innovation team. And in about half the organizations which have gone through this experience, they have asked us to drop that language, making a distinction. And indeed, I think it is a piece of, again, what social workers are committed to, is that really it needs to not only come from but be owned by the people for whom it affects the most. Not only because it will be successful, I mean, clearly that's an important piece of this, but it's the only way we're going to be able to sustain innovation, so it doesn't become a one-shot experience and then it dies and we have to go on to something else. So I think it's good that you picked up on that, Phil. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to I certainly agree with your ideas that the people in the community need to lead the effort. At the same time, and I think that's why social workers need to be involved in this, there is no other profession that has the community ties that social work does. We have more troops in the community than any other profession. I'm sure this school probably has 400 or 500 agencies around the area which students are in. We are the most diverse profession in America. Most often on colleges and university campuses, we have the most diverse student body as well as the most diverse faculty. We're also probably the only profession by design created to give services of one class of people to another. I do agree that the people in communities need to be very much involved in these efforts, but social work can play a tremendous role here. One of the things that we have in communities is not just the absence of will, but the absence of a way to carry out that will. I think developing community partners with public, private, non-profit agencies can really sort of facilitate our efforts as social workers. We do need partners in this. But this is not just a homegrown problem. I mean, this is America's problem. I'm particularly thinking about the educational problems in America, and particularly those race-related problems in America. This is a big problem. I particularly like the Homewood model because the Harlem Children's Zone. Pittsburgh is an effort to replicate it called the Homewood Children's Village. But there too, the Harlem Children's Zone is a very expensive process. I mean, it consumes a lot of money. I'm not sure that every poor community in America can replicate that. But I think as social workers, we can bring a lot to that. But we can't just throw it to the communities and say, well, it's up to you to do. They don't have the capacity. I mean, it's a romantic notion that the people will lead. They will, but they will do their part, certainly. But we need tremendous infusions of capital, tremendous infusions of intellect, and human capital. Often that's not there. I mean, you think about the community, the average black community. Presently, there are 2 million people in prison in America, 900,000 black males. Well, who's going to do this work we're talking about in part? I mean, it isn't just up to them. We have to be involved. Social workers as a profession, it amazes me that we haven't been more involved. We sort of talk about educational problems as though there's something wrong with the kids educationally. Sometimes there is. But what we're really seeing with the educational process in America is social problems. It's manifesting itself in classrooms, schools, and we sort of say the teachers are at the end of the line, so to speak. They sort of are held responsible for the failure of the students. But in fact, we're looking at family structures. We look at African American families. You basically only have 70% single-parent families, 25% maybe two-parent families. You have only 40% of the sort of the income of the rest of the country. You have not only 1/20 the net worth. I mean, we have some major problems here. It isn't just a question of a population unwilling to do for itself. We almost, in some respects, need something equivalent to a Marshall Plan. But barring that's unlikely to happen. But social workers can. I don't think we can solve this, but I think we can really be very instrumental. And the reason I pick on the Harlem Children's Zone is because I like the Harlem Children's Zone. In fact, I want it to work. I just don't think it can be done every place. And I think social workers can pick up some of the slack in communities that don't have the resources to do a Harlem Children's Zone.
Go ahead,
Just very quick. Yesterday, I had the joy of sitting on a dissertation defense of a person whose whole dissertation was on participant direction and what were the perceived outcomes from the points of view of state officials, participants themselves, and advocates. So it was sort of a joy. But I'll echo Larry's. One of Larry's points, there's a distinct role for the university as well, both in both documenting success, pointing out best practice, evaluations, sharing some of these results. So the nature of the partnership.
Good, thank you, Kevin. As kind of a last round, I would like to pick up where Larry left off, where he spoke so eloquently about the powerful role that social workers play in communities. And I'd love to hear the rest of you share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on that. I think that it is a powerful role. I don't think it's the only role, and I don't think anyone here has said that. But I think the concept of the partnerships that both social work entities, whether they're in academia or within entities themselves that actually function as social work agencies, as well as community-based organizations. There's a myriad of organizations that are so important to making sure that there is a movement forward as far as the problems that exist in this society. And obviously, these problems have existed for generations, for actually at this point for centuries, in relation to the first introduction of Europeans into this society. Problems existed prior to that, just as problems existed, whether it was in Europe or in Africa or in Asia. The fact is that worldwide, we've had problems existing. And how do we deal with the actual historical events that are taking place today that are impacting us, on us in relation to social problems? And I think that the concept again, and I think we should focus on that, of these partnerships that are really critical to dealing with those problems.
Anyone else?
Okay. I'll jump in. I think in terms of the role of social workers in communities, first of all, it extends way beyond social innovation. I think that there has been, there continues to be not only a role for, but an urgency for social workers not only to continue to carry the mantle, but I think to begin to explore and examine new ways of responding to these issues. There is a delicate dance of sharing professional skills and where leadership gets kind of fused. But I think that for social workers to be in the community, to be in the agencies, to me is it's where we belong. It's where our passion is. There are a lot of comments today. I think that as a society, people are looking for purpose, looking for meaning. Well, social work's been there a while, but I think the important piece of what professionally trained social workers bring to the conversation is we've all been trained not only to understand the complexity of social issues, but continue to ask those questions so that we don't get caught into these experiences where we think, okay, if situation A emerges, then we do B. That, hopefully we've all been trained in some good analytic thinking and really some processes so that we can learn as we go along. I think if nothing else, social workers bring to the table a very sophisticated understanding of not only building but maintaining collaborations and partnerships. And honestly, if we've learned nothing or if I've learned nothing over the past 5 decades, it's that social workers can lead the charge with these collaborations that are so needed. And that is a skill set, but more importantly, a perspective and passion we bring to the table.
Any final comment, Kevin? No?
No, maybe I'll focus on the partnership,
Okay.
that word. I know in my own area, were it not for research, the power of a controlled experiment, the power of that analytic capacity, we're now at the point where this, what we call cash and counseling approach, is in 43 different states. But on the other hand, I know that in this budget environment and what states are going through, I know nursing homes have strong lobbies, I know home care agencies have strong lobbies, and if there were not strong organized national participant network, these programs would be gone or diminished. Part of the partnership, the skills of social workers, there are times I'm searching for a noun. It's a quandary. So much of our social work tradition is empowerment. And yet, for some social workers, an idea of the participant being in charge is, how does this rankle with the medical model I've been working with? Is a real challenge. So I don't want to be, I don't know what to call it, so celebratory. We have a lot to offer, but we have a lot to self-examine as well.
Good, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you all. Now I'd like to turn the table and ask you to participate in this discussion by asking questions, brief questions, because we only have about 15 minutes left. So I'd encourage you to go to one of the 2 mics in the middle of the auditorium to ask your question.
Hi. I don't know if you can
Sure.
hear me.
Good morning.
I kind of have to stand on my tippy toes. But anyways, my question is really, could somebody please describe succinctly what the Harlem Children's Project was, or zone? Because you've mentioned it so many times, and some of us don't know what that whole program was.
Okay. The Harlem Children's Zone is a project that's currently going on in Harlem. The architect and visionary was Jeffrey Canada. The goal is to enhance the educational outcomes of children. What they have done is taking over roughly 100 square blocks of Harlem, not all at one time, but it's probably where it is now. And he found that was to, in an effort to bring about greater educational outcomes, that they had to take over greater efforts at really socializing children. They have something called College for Parenting, children's programs that take them to see arts. Basically what they're doing is they're compensating for poverty. That's really what they're doing. They're giving poor children the experiences that middle-class children have. But the point is that it's what in group work we call extra group means of influence, that they're doing it outside of the school, that they're measuring effects inside the school, but they're having all these interventions that basically have nothing per se to do with education, but they recognize ultimately they do affect the educational process.
On this side. Yep. Welcome.
I began to applaud when Mr. Mahoney used the word budget, because I hadn't heard anyone else talk about money and how we get money to do all the wonderful things we know how to do. We're living in a climate today where the health and welfare of people is really not a priority with the people who give us money to do those things. Although I appreciate everything you've all said, I think we really cannot be innovative, no matter how powerful we are ourselves, without understanding that when you sit on a community services board as a powerful person, you know the community, you've assessed it, and you say to the bosses, this is what needs to be done, and here's the proof. The boss can say back to you, sorry, we don't agree.
Who'd like to comment on money and budget? That is very important. Thank you.
I mean, very briefly, the whole issue of capital should be looked at various levels. One, we know that this country needs a lot of capital, and at the same time, one of the best ways of getting that capital is through taxes. And yet we have a Congress that is saying, let's lower the taxes. And that definitely will benefit the corporations who are not going to be helping the country, I think, as a whole. They will be helping their personal pockets, unfortunately. That's one. And that does impact the type of money that is siphoned into, I think, local organizations, whether it's a social work entity or community-based organization. Many of these organizations depend on government for their funds. The others are the philanthropic organizations that depend on the goodwill of people, whether you're low income, middle income, or very high-end donors. But that is the other end, and both community-based organizations and also social work entities as well as universities depend on the goodwill of the foundations. And so we have to look at balancing and seeing where are we in terms of pressing our congresspeople, in terms of what's best for our community and for our families, and also looking at how are we helping philanthropic organizations do a better job, particularly those, I would say, foundations that are aligned to the way, to your own beliefs. And so there are a variety of organizations. Are you supporting, let's say, the very place where you work? Many times your own donations to the place that you work will make a significant difference. That's, the way I see it.
I don't know why I'm almost back to, I agree very much with the woman who spoke. I'm back to my alcoholic's prayer. And just a few thoughts. Ours is perhaps the power of ideas, the power of research, the power of disseminating the work that we do. I'll just say, though, it's our job also to look creatively. When we do outcome research, one of them is costs. We have to look for more efficient ways. We have to become persuasive speakers. And in new areas, it's another area for creativity. My whole area, is also, how do you pay in the future for nursing home and home care? Is it a brilliant idea to all of a sudden think it's going to have to be a public-private partnership? Now, how do we do it? But it's do what we can do.
Great. Why don't we take a question from this side? Thank you, Kim.
I started school here in September 11th, and so my whole foundation was built on that, and I remember saying, I better run from this profession. But I'm still here, and so aren't all of you, which I think is a real testament to all of you in this profession. And I wanted to know, since that year and that fateful day, if you could tell me one innovative thing that you've done specifically related to 9/11.
Good. I'd love to jump in on that, just because I was thinking. it's just a happenstance. 10 years ago today, September 14th, I was at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I had been September 11th speaking at state government in Nebraska and Lincoln. It turned out the hotel where we were became a Red Cross emergency center before the day was over. I kept my rental car, drove back, was with family in Iowa, then I was with a friend whose wife had been in Tower 1, but had gotten out, and I stayed there so he could get her. When I went to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, people who would have been all over the country were there. And I learned that they were about to end our demonstration. The research had been successful. And we started talking about what if a foundation stuck with an idea and said, we could bring this to scale. We could really work on the implementation research. We could do something we've never done before. And I literally say it's a crazy set of circumstances, but that would be 10 years ago today for me.
I can't claim that this is directly related to 9/11, but in 2002, the School of Social Work there at Pitt created a Center on Race and Social Problems. One of the components of that center has to do with intergroup relations, and we have made great efforts to include really a diverse group of individuals to work together. Foremost, that's really how the center got started, with intergroup relations. And I think clearly it's something we need to work on. I was particularly appalled with people who thought we should build a mosque here or not be able to build one there. And I think our efforts to foster greater intergroup understanding is certainly something we should be doing since 9/11.
Good, thank you. Susan.
Hi. I think there are 3 points I want to make. First is the approach, the second is timing, and then maybe in reaction, how about getting organized? We talked about, partnerships. It really comes down to power, and it's power shared versus powered over. And I think that's a struggle for this profession. I think it's a struggle for me personally. I think it's one of those things, just like racism, you have to continually check yourself at the table. And until we begin to reflect that, not only in the supervision we give, in the kinds of programs we set up, but it also speaks in terms of what Larry was talking about, the whole educational system, timing. We're social workers. We get, I got taught Margaret Mahler. Anybody ever heard of her? 0 to 18 months. 0 to 3, all the brain literature. If we know that, why is it that we still kind of focus on the pathology, that we wait until after the damage is done, and then we get in? I think for this field, particularly to social workers, we need to turn around and really look at how do we get in there early. Work with parents. They all want the best for their kids. Make sure that they know how to help that baby be smart and on target so that by the time they get to school, there is a partnership. Parents are engaged, they're empowered, they know and want to do the best. And I guess last but not least, organize. It's not enough just to give money. It's shameful that we are such a quiet crowd, and that until we really encourage NASW to do a better job getting us organized, until we're out there, you know what? We vote. And if we don't, shame.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, so
I'll turn right to the next question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all the panelists today for all of your comments. I've actually taken a lot from the various comments that were made. One of the things that has struck me, not only in my experience here at BC, but subsequently in my experience in the professional world, I think one of the issues that is a fundamental issue for me is the issue of racism and classism. And as a woman of color, I really struggled with my experience as a student. I'm happy to hear that in the schools that you've sort of overseen that there's been quite some diversity. In my experience, it wasn't quite that way. And so I think one of the issues for me when we talk about social innovation, really there's a step before that, which is self-reflection. And I don't know, or I don't believe in my experience that as a profession we do a good enough job of doing that. And so when we're talking about engaging communities, if we are not sort of in a place ourselves that we understand the dynamics that are playing out, we're not doing service to those communities. And so I would like to hear from your perspective, how do you think the profession is addressing the issues of racism in a concrete way? Maybe mandated, discussions as part of the CUs. I mean, I don't know, but I'm curious to hear what folks think about that. Thank you.
Just very quickly, in relation to, I must say, my own experience in academia was always a struggle. I was a student teacher within academia, but I also was an organizer in relation to issues as it impacted on students of color, and particularly low-income students, because I would say that it's very difficult for many universities to really create that space for students of color that come from low-income working-class backgrounds. And many times there isn't a support system. Once you're within academia, where either you become an organizer, student organizer, or else you're isolated. And it's very reflective, I think, of society. So I think that it's not so much the profession of social work, but what are we doing as a people to really deal with this issue?
This is an issue, of course, dear to my heart. I'll say the first thing, you'll see that the next program on our whole 75th anniversary day is, at least for students and faculty, a whole session on diversity. No one will ever claim they, have gone. We've made really great progress in this area. There's always more to go, but the attention, from my point of view, under Dean Gadenzi, Paul Klein, Elaine Pinder-Hughes, to this whole, area, as far as everything from hiring to staff policies, everything from classwork, is one of the things I'd be the proudest of at least these recent years. And even as an example, I would have just yesterday gotten an approval from, there's a magazine that goes to all 28 Jesuit universities, a paper that a PhD student who's now graduated and I did on Georgetown's LGBT Resource Center is now going to be in that all 28 Jesuit universities, their boards of trustees, et cetera. So it's an area we're very proud of right now.
Last year, I'm reluctant to mention this only because it was our program. Last year, the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work put on Race in America Conference. It was the largest race conference, to my belief, ever been put on in America. And what made it different, in some respects, was besides its size and its focus, but it attempted to integrate many of the scholars in the field, but also it brought to bear the people in those areas. For example, there was a section on criminal justice, and of course the warden was there and the chief of police was there, things like that. But it's a constant struggle. I mean, Julian Bond gave the opening words for the conference, and he put it very well. He was saying, he's surprised that he's fighting some of the same things now that he fought some 40 years ago. This is an ongoing process. I do want to say to you that students like yourself who asked the question, faculty members, it's something that you can never back off of. It's never done. It's never solved. And there is one of the more interesting sort of lectures that a person gave on race in America, in that you have to watch something with your efforts in universities or any place you are. Majority groups want to talk about celebrating differences. Minority groups want to talk about disparities. Mm-hmm. One is corrective, the other is celebratory. I mean, it's not our differences per se that's the problem. It's the disparity that our differences bring about that causes the problem. So, yeah. But your school, in deference to your dean, is one of my most fiercest. Please. Was one of my most sincere competitors. He has taken your school in one term. He's been dean for 10 years. From 24th, from one cycle. You know, schools are measured every 10 years. From one cycle, from 24 to 14th. I'm 14th also, so I'm very unhappy about that. But what he has managed to do, of course, a great deal of that is that he has addressed diversity. He's sincere about it. I don't know if it's because he's from Europe or I don't know what the ingredient is. But I think your school is doing a good job of it. But in answer to it, it's never done. I mean, it's like if you say, well, I'll go to church 1 week, I did that, so I'm done with it. No, you're not quite done with it. Well, you're not quite done with this either. So I applaud your fact that you continue to have questions. You have a long legacy of all sorts of people, deans and faculty members who've been doing this for a long time. So I say only to your school to stay with it. It's America. Race is America's problem. It's America's fundamental problem. It's America's seed. That's the nightmare that we have, and we probably won't get rid of it during any of our lifetimes, but we can certainly make improvements in it. So I wish you continued luck at this school.
Did you have something, Marcy? No.
Could I just say one?
Go ahead.
Just on the issue of disparity, I agree with you, but I also think it's an issue of disproportionality when we look at our prisons and who's in them. So it's disproportional in some areas and disparity in terms of access in others. Just that one comment.
Oh, the disparities are tremendous, absolutely. You have, like as I mentioned earlier, you have 2 million people in jail, in prison of some sort. You have roughly 900,000 of those being African-American males. I mean, the expectation, if I can't imagine this happening with another group, but the odds on an African-American male being born today serving some time in his lifetime is 1 in 3. I mean, these numbers are just incredible. You know, you have, occasionally I will do some consulting, I don't so much anymore, but for the Veterans Administration. And one of the figures I ran across, which is just an astounding figure in this area, that during the Vietnam War, 58,000 American troops were killed. 7,200 of those troops were black Americans. The Vietnam conflict took place for 13 years. It took 13 years to kill 58,000 people, or 7,200 black males, 13 years. America on its streets manages to kill on average somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 males every year. And they have done so for the last 40 consecutive years. We could build a Vietnam War for black Americans every year. So there's tremendous, you're absolutely right, there's tremendous disparities. And that's just a glowing one. I mean, it's just an incredible figure.
Thank you, Larry. I'm afraid on that note, we will have to conclude this morning's session because it's just 12:20 and I had very strict orders to close. So thank you for waiting for your questions. Okay. Yeah, I want to just in ending express my deep appreciation to the panel and to all of you. I thought this was a particularly engaging discussion, so thank you.